All right, we're getting going. You have a hammer. I know, right? Well, good afternoon, everyone. I hope you've had as long a day as I've had already, because that should make our budget deliberations even more interesting. I'd like to begin by asking for a motion to reconvene an open session. Motion by Tom, seconded by Les. All those in favor? Opposed? So carried. Any declarations of pecuniary interest? Awkward silence. Seeing none. We'll begin by opening remarks of Sean. Well, I shouldn't be pointing out that Sean's unavailable at this moment. And so here I am. We have a new system here, and if anybody remembers the fun we had at GRCA with the new system, I think we're about to see a deja vu experience. So be prepared. And I'll hand it over to Mr. Murray. Talking stick is yours.
Sorry, what did you say? Motion to adjourn. Seeing no one to pass it over to, I guess I'll have to speak. So thank you, Madam Chair, members of council. Welcome to our second 2019 budget committee meeting. We have a fair bit of material to go through today. You'll recall back on December 11th, we went through, I'd say, a high-level overview of the budget, the factors that we're expecting to be impactful, if you will, through the 2019 budget process, both the operating and the capital side. And today we have additional details to provide for you with respect to both water and wastewater budgets as well as the tax-supported budget. As just a reminder, all the region's budget information is available on the region's website, including the preliminary document that was circulated back on the 11th of December, the budget issue paper package, and we will be spending some time on budget issue papers today. And you'll recall that these are requests, recommendations for program expansions and enhancements going into 2019. So we will spend a fair bit of time today on those. And of course, you can find the Budget Committee agenda from the December 11th and today's meeting. So just in terms of an overview of the things that we're going to talk about today, I'm going to be brief at the outset and then turn it over to the representatives from the Grand River Conservation Authority who will provide an update on their proposed 2019 budget. We'll then have a detailed presentation with respect to the 2019 water and wastewater budgets. And then we'll get into the tax-supported budget, including a number of housekeeping adjustments that are in the staff report as part of the agenda today. Talk a bit about both operating and capital issue papers, as I already mentioned. We have 3 information papers that will provide a brief overview of and a number of councillor requests from last time that we've responded to through today's agenda. And then, of course, we have our first formal public input meeting scheduled for 6 p.m. Today. And I thought I would just start right off with the requests that we received back on December the 11th. I thought it would be helpful to just provide, I won't go through it in detail. It's basically just to show how each of these requests has been dealt with. And you'll see most of the requests coming out of December the 11th are addressed in one form or another through today's package. There's one item, the one right at the bottom, the funding strategy options for the Regional Transportation Master Plan. We'll be bringing that forward on February 6th, and that will allow us some time to review those recommendations with the Rapid Transit Steering Committee. In terms of challenges, these were the 4 main categories of challenges outlined by Mr. Murray back in December. They haven't changed. I think that's fair to say. Perhaps a little bit more uncertainty at this point now, specifically with respect to development charges and some potential direction that the province might be going through their housing supply action plan. And there'll be a report coming forward from staff to the January 29th January 29th committee meetings. So a number of base budget pressures, we'll go through those again today. Infrastructure funding continues to be top of mind for us here at the region, and a number of proposed service enhancements through the budget issue papers. From an overall budget cycle perspective, we're obviously right in the midst of the budget committee review process and public input. That'll take us into February, and we have 2 approval dates scheduled in February. One is February 6th for the user rate budgets, and one is February 19th for the tax-supported budget. And user rate budgets is where we're going to start our conversation today. Information with respect to the user rate budgets found in the budget book, found in 3 separate information papers where we go into a little bit more detail on both operating and capital for both water and wastewater. And we have 2 budget issue papers relating to the user rate budgets found on page 9 and 11 of that package. And at this point, Madam Chair, if there are no questions, I will turn the podium over to Joe Farwell, the CAO for the Grand River Conservation Authority.
Thank you, Craig. Welcome, Joe. Long time no see.
Great. Thank you, Madam Chair. I have with me Sonia Radoja and Karen Armstrong. Sonia is our finance expert, and she'll present the last half of the budget. Karen's our deputy CAO. We'll start with a little bit about the Grand River watershed, not as much detail as normal maybe, but because we want to get right down to the budget. But it runs for 300 kilometers. It covers an area the size of Prince Edward Island, and it flows into Lake Erie at Port Maitland. There are about 11,000 kilometers of rivers and streams in our watershed. There are 4 major tributaries, the Speed, Eramosa, Nith, and Conestoga. Nith and Conestoga are most floodplain rivers reaches, and so we deal with that later in the presentation. There's about 1 million people here in our watershed, 39 municipalities and 2 First Nations, and the majority of the people live in the 5 main cities in the center part of the watershed. Farming is a really big part in the Grand River watershed. 70% of the watershed is agricultural land. The river is used for drinking water, although most people get water from wells. There is still an important part of the watershed that gets water from the river. There are 30 sewage treatment plants in the Grand River watershed. About the river, the watershed faces some important and really evolving challenges, I would say. Population growth is certainly one of them. There's a need for water supplies, sewage treatment, and groundwater recharge. And this is an important picture. This is the city of Cambridge in the Grand through Galt section of Cambridge. And I will make a note here that this stretch of river has seen some pretty dramatic improvements over the years, in part because of the region's investment in wastewater treatment plant upgrades. I can say that from a chemical perspective, it's got better oxygen profiles, fewer dissolved oxygen problems, it's got lower ammonia. And as somebody who uses this stretch of the river fairly often in my kayak, it actually even smells better and feels better. So kudos to the folks that put some real effort into upgrading those treatment plants. Agriculture is another important part of our watershed, as I mentioned, and it has potential to impact water quality and quantity, and there's a need to deal with erosion. And we have got a long-standing working relationship with the farm community in this watershed, and it's a very positive relationship, and it leads to some very good results. Climate change we've identified that as the issue of our time. It's presenting us with some challenges as both a water manager and as a landowner. We try to deal with flooding almost in every month of the year now. But as a landowner, we get hit with ice storms and real challenges within our park system. This past year, we worked out a new strategic plan and created a new vision for the next 3 years. And it's a healthy watershed where we live, work, play, and prosper in balance with the natural environment. And we really wanted to stress the importance of healthy communities and balance between the environment and a prosperous community where we all live and work. Our mission will work with our local communities to reduce flood damage, provide access to outdoor spaces, share information about natural watersheds more resilient to climate change. We tried to capture our entire program area within our mission statement. Our strategic priorities are to protect life and minimize property damage from flooding and erosion, and I would go so far as to say that's our highest calling at the Grand River Conservation Authority. We continually work to improve the health of the Grand River watershed. Our third priority is to connect people with the environment through outdoor experiences. We believe that they will protect what they understand and value, and managing our land holdings in a responsible way. In terms of protecting life and property damage, there are 7 main reservoirs that are actively operated to keep flow in the river. And the blue section of the little circular graphs you'll see is the portion that's augmented flow in the summer. So you can see that in the summertime, the majority of the flow in the main rivers is actually from our reservoirs. We work with the province and with the municipalities on source protection planning. A plan was approved in 2016. There's currently some work underway, and I won't go into the details of that, but it's certainly on your slides for future reference. I do want to touch on the Rural Water Quality Program. That's something that I think the region should take a lot of pride in, because you can see it spread to the entire watershed almost. And the history is that in 1998, the region put some capital money into this, and the GRCA agreed to deliver the program on behalf of the region. So we've worked with farmers starting in the region, and provided grants to carry out rural water quality program projects. Up to date, there's been 6,000 projects completed in the watershed, more than 18 million in grants, and 50 million of that was invested. And all those grants didn't come just from the region. We source federal funding where we can, but we've drawn the other municipalities into it as well. So we've created almost a watershed-wide program, and more recently Dufferin has jumped into the fray. So that's great news all around. In 2018, there were 88 completed projects in the region, almost 300,000 in grants, $250,000 in landowner contributions. So a real important investment in water quality in our region. Outdoor education, it's an important part of what we do through our nature centers. We put 40,000 students a year through our outdoor education facilities. We do have day camps, and they run in the summertime, and we provide programming for kids and families on weekends. We really think if people are connected with the environment that we live in, they will understand it and value it, and hopefully work to protect it someday. Our conservation areas, again, that's part of our effort to connect people with the environment. They are essentially financially sustainable. They are hardly dependent on weather, but our more current challenges relate to crowding. People are finding them very attractive places to be, and managing the demand is a challenge. Natural areas, connecting people with the environment in a responsible land management program. There's certainly increasing pressures on our lands. I know there's been homeless encampments set up in some of our city lands. Real pressure on use as the population grows. People want to spend some time outside. It puts pressure on some of our lands, and we have a lot of land within the region that's non-revenue generating. That's maybe a little bit hard to see, but each one of those green dots is a GRCA parcel. And again, the public want to use these lands. We have to sort out how we're going to manage them. So we've been working to wind down our residential program through direction of our board, and really focus on those lands we hold for environmental reasons. And I'm going to turn it over to Sonia to take you through the budget. And it's the button on there. Right.
Thank you, Madam Chair, for allowing us the opportunity to present. I just have a few slides on our budget specifics. The first thing to note is that our budget is actually not approved until the end of February. So the version that we are speaking about today is a draft version. In terms of our revenue of about $34 million, the composition has not changed significantly over the years. It's about 1/3 of the municipal levy, and almost half is self-generated. And the significant item to note here is that the general municipal levy is going to be proposed to be increased by 2.5% in 2019 overall for the GRCA, and that represents a slight 2.8% increase related to our operating expenses, and our capital levy is being held constant. And also should note that we have a few million that we spend on special projects, and that there are always additional funding sources for those, and we do not rely on the municipal levy to fund them. Again, expenditures, the composition has remained fairly consistent over the years. In terms of our operating budget, it's about 26 million out of the 34 million. And we have our water control structures that we manage, flood forecasting, resource planning, and lands management that fall in that area. Our conservation areas are almost over one quarter of our overall revenues and almost half of our self-generated revenues, and also have corporate services and communication costs related to our programs. Our capital budget's about $5 million and is basically relates to dams and our parks. For the dams, we have about $1.5 million in expenses, and about half of that then should be funded through a transfer payment from the province, referred to as the WECI program. And our conservation areas, they're ramping up for some very significant capital spending in the next few years. A lot of it around Elora Gorge and campground expansion, and we moved some campers, and they need some significant bridge repairs. Again, as I mentioned, the special projects have special funding, and there's some good activity going on in terms of floodplain mapping and quite a bit of federal dollars flowing through to us to work on that. We have our rural water quality program that's been around for a long time. We spend over close to $1 million on grants out of that program. Source protection, certainly been around for a while. We're continue to manage the emerald ash borer infestation, and that's been assisted in terms of funding through the province permitting us to use the land proceeds grant, in which they have a vested interest to use almost $2 million over the next few years to manage that, and then a few other small projects. And this is maybe the most important slide. You can read it better on your screen, I hope. That even though the levy is going up 2.5% overall, given the way we prorate the revenue amongst the various partners, the region is going up 2.3% year over year. And in terms of per capita, it's about $10.84 per person compared to $10.72 in the prior year, which actually represents just slightly over a 1% increase if we take it in that perspective. This is probably the most unusual, out of the norm in terms of our budgeting exercise that we are navigating through, and that has been a Mining and Lands Commissioner's decision that came through last year. And the effect of this decision has affected us in the budget year we just finished, 2018, and it will continue to affect us in 2019. And basically a ruling came down that required us to change the methodology in which the way we distributed levies amongst the municipalities. And Hamilton is challenging that because they were the losers in that exercise. Their levy went up substantially and everybody else's levy went down. But they are appealing that decision. So the next hearing will be in February to determine whether this appeal can even be heard and go any further. So if that's successful, the next step would be to have a judicial review of that decision. So the thing to note here is, in fact, that in 2018, when we presented our first draft of the budget, there was a substantial difference between that and where we landed. Basically, the region's levy came down was reduced $650,000. And we have been indicating to municipalities that given the uncertainty around this issue, to maybe keep that set aside a bit. So 2019 continues to be lower than what it would be if we in fact were going under the old method. So the overall potential is that if this ruling goes in Hamilton's favor, that we may be able to go back to the other municipalities to for about $650,000 for both 2019 and 2018. And of course, we're not sure what the timelines could be on this decision. And we are also not sure of what the outcome would be of the decision and how it would play out. There's no precedent. It's simply unknown. Madam Chair, that ends our formal presentation.
Thank you, Sonia. You never disappoint to make things very understandable. Appreciate that. Any questions? Carl. Sorry, Carl. I'm just, my very first time. You're it. There you go.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thanks very much for the presentation. One of the questions I had, really, I'm not sure it has anything to do with this, but would you happen to know or have an update of what's happening, if anything, with the Preston Dam, Joe? Would you know anything about that?
Through you, Madam Chair, I would look to the City of Cambridge for a response to that. I haven't had an update lately, but again, it's a city dam. You know, we participated in the environmental assessment. My understanding was an alternative selected, and that's under review now.
Thank you.
Seeing no further questions on this, I would like to just make a comment that Jane Mitchell is here from our board. Hi, Jane. Nice to see you. And I thought Warren was here. Yeah, DeLevo. Okay. So anyway, just to acknowledge from our board of directors and appreciate that. Thank you very much. Excellent presentation as always.
Thank you.
Excuse me. At this point, Madam Chair, I'll turn the podium over to Nancy Kadusek, and Nancy's going to run us through a presentation with respect to the 2019 proposed water and wastewater budgets.
Thank you. Through to you, Madam Chair. This is the 2019 user rate presentation. Water Services, as you know, supplies drinking water and treats wastewater for the region of Waterloo and provides collection and distribution services for North Dumfries and Wellesley. And just as a little reminder, we have 7 different areas in Water Services. The Water Supply Group, which operates the treatment facilities, that service is provided by region staff. The wastewater treatment operation is provided by the Ontario Clean Water Agency. We have technical services of hydrogeology and source protection, and they provide the source protection planning and compliance with the Clean Water Act requirements. There's also the engineering and planning group, which provide master planning, environmental assessments, EAs, and work on planning issues. We have environmental enforcement and laboratory services, and they provide spills response as one of their requirements. They also do a sewer use bylaw enforcement and provide laboratory services. There's water efficiency and finance admin. The water supply system in 2018 provided 54 million cubic meters of safe drinking water to the region. The system includes 1 surface water treatment plant, which is the Mannheim Water Treatment Plant, and over 100 groundwater wells. Each year, as we start the user rate review and budget process, we review the budgeted flows that we have and also the actual flows. And this graph, the green lines show you what we budgeted each year for the last several years, and the beige lines or bars show you what the actual flows were. In 2018, we budgeted 53.7 million cubic meters, and we actually treated and supplied 54 million cubic meters. So a very small variance there. For 2019, we projected out a flow of 53.6. We have been seeing that the water flows have been very flat over the last couple of years, and we adjusted them accordingly. For our operating budget, staff work very hard to keep costs close to inflation, and the operating budget is at $35 million. This pie chart really just shows the breakdown of the operating budget. So looking at staff at 28%, that's about $9.9 million. Utilities are sitting at 23%, which represents approximately $8 million. Other operating expenses of chemicals and maintenance are at 24% and just a little over $8 million. And the fixed costs are sitting at 25, which again is just slightly above that $8 million mark. On the water capital budget, the water capital program is at 481 for 2019 to 28. And again, it was held very close to what it was in 2018. The planning and studies that we do are 58 million. The water main work that we'll be projecting out over the next 10 years is at 64 million. Our asset management and infrastructure program is 180 million, and it includes an investment of 19 million for SCADA, as well as continuing to invest in asset management, condition assessments, and doing work on our work management system and the implementation of a new software as a corporate initiative called Lucidity. We're also doing a number of upgrades at various facilities throughout the region, and that represents 173 million. One of the new projects we're looking on is optimizing our Elmira and St. Jacobs system. So we're actually putting a twin or backup line into St. Jacobs and Elmira, and that's part of that project. We're continuing to work on Conestoga and Westmount Rose. In 2018, we put a water main between Conestoga and Westmount Rose water supply system, and took those wells offline and to provide a secure supply. And this year we'll be connecting the Conestoga Plains plant to St. Jacobs to provide water to those systems. Cambridge Distribution is getting a major upgrade in its distribution system, which includes a new water tower, and we're working on a project right now to site where that water tower will be located. And we're also working on a Williams and Strange Street project where we'll tie those two treatment plants together. So the water from Williams Street will be piped across to Strange Street, and from there we'll have one treatment plant that will provide water both to Kitchener and to Waterloo. So a few budget efficiencies for this budget cycle in 2019. The water system, we were able to identify $575,000 worth of savings. And some of those budget savings are related to hydro reductions by right-sizing and automating pumps. It also represents a change in some of the overhead charges that we have in our hydro rates. Optimizing our treatment plant through the pipeline that was put in at Westmount Rose. We have a more secure supply, and we're no longer trucking water, so we had a savings there. We converted a number of systems from UV. A few of the UV systems had met their useful life, and we converted now to chlorine disinfection. And for our SCADA system, we updated our system using either cellular or fiber network. We no longer use the Bell phone lines, and we're also upgrading our SCADA control systems, which will provide us with better control and monitoring. For this graph, this is really just to highlight our hydro usage, and over the years, we've been working to invest in equipment and processes that will allow us to reduce our consumption. So in 2018, we used 41 million kilowatt hours of energy at a cost of 64 million. And we did see over the last few years the price of the energy or hydro going down. And part of that is related to a change in the global adjustment, the retirement of debt in 2018 on the hydro side, and a change from a Class B to Class A for our major facility, for our pumping facilities at the Hidden Valley High Lift, Low Lift.
is this an okay time for question, or would you?
Sure, certainly.
Are you okay with that? All right. Chair Redmond?
Thank you. Nancy, on the slide that says budget efficiency, so I think it's just the previous one, it looks like we're going from, and I understand that remove the UV, you said it was at its end of life. Is chlorine, I guess I've just always had the impression UV was sort of more environmentally friendly than chlorine, so I'm just wondering if you can talk a little bit about that change, optimizing process, the middle arrow.
So in the in early 2000s, some of the well systems that in this example that were very small, it was decided to put in UV for disinfection as well as chlorine, as well as still chlorine is still required. In 2017 and 18, the province changed some of the different disinfection requirements, and when we reviewed those requirements, it was more streamlined for us, for these smaller well systems, to actually treat with chlorine. So chlorine is always a safe way of treating water, and the smell of chlorine, we now say to customers, is something that tells you that your water is safe. So it is equally as good as UV, but even with UV, you always have to add chlorine as well. So for these systems, they looked at the opportunity of maintaining a UV system, updating it, or converting to chlorine, and it was decided that the best solution would be to move to chlorine for these smaller systems.
So what I'm hearing you say is that the environmental impact is at least comparable, if not neutral, irrespective of which combination you use?
Yes, it doesn't have, in this case, using chlorine with disinfection, you're not using the energy that you would for a UV unit. And so you have a contact tank and you have a chemical system that feeds into the chlorine system. So it would be comparable to the energy that's needed for a UV system.
And the environmental impact is comparable?
Yes.
Okay. Thank you.
Comparable. Okay, thank you. And just for some program initiatives, compliance is always top of mind in the water industry. And in 2017 and 18, we met all our Ontario drinking water standard requirements and our inspection criteria requirements. For source protection, this is something fairly new with the risk management office that we have. And this year or last year, they completed 34 risk management plans. They're continuing their work on educating and have various programs about source protection and continue working on their awareness on salt impacts to our water supply. We also spent a lot of time working on asset management, improving our capital optimization, how we align our work between engineering planning and design and construction, and how we monitor and report on our capital programs. We have completed 60 condition assessments that feed into the asset management program and also are working on a Lucity implementation. Lucity is the software name for the work management system that we'll be using. And a little bit about water innovations. We're continuing to work at the Mannheim treatment plant. We had a 3-phase optimization study where we were looking at our settling system, our filter system, and its ozone system to optimize and improve them, and improve both the treatment, reduce energy, and improve water quality. So that's ongoing. We continue to work on our education programs, and salt shifting is our most recent salt awareness program. And one of our newer programs that we've been working on is we partnered with a local company, and they actually put radio frequency signals on some of our water towers. We brought a report earlier to council, I believe last year or the year before, to approve them putting these radio signals on some of our water towers. And through this, network technology that they have, we're monitoring our monitoring wells, and we're able to get real-time information about the water levels, temperature, and pH from those wells. So it's a program that we started as a pilot, and we're now expanding. So just a little bit about some of the innovation that we're doing on the water side. With that, I've completed my presentation on the water side, and I'm going to switch now to the wastewater side, if that's okay.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Nancy, just a couple of questions on water. So the reduction in the hydro consumption is fairly significant, and I think you did attribute that to a couple of different things. But to what extent, if you know, has our solar projects been a benefit?
So the solar projects really are a facilities project, and so we those solar panels, they go directly to the
grid. So they don't power the plant.
So that system is operated by the facilities group.
Okay, that's fair. The other question I had, so it's quite interesting to see that our water production is staying quite constant over the last number of years. And although the community continues to grow. So you may not have it with you, but could we get the peak demand numbers for the same years? And so do you know off the top of your head if that they've also been flat or?
So in 2019 was actually a dry summer,
yeah,
and fairly pleasant, warm summer. So, and notwithstanding that, you can see that over the summer period, we did see some higher peaks usually in May and June, but then it usually flattens out in July and August, and that's because most people go on holidays over July and August period. So we can get you the peak demands, but I think they were still well within kind of normal operating ranges. So I think the fact that we're at 54 million, it showcases that our water efficiency program and our outdoor water conservation bylaw is still working.
And so I'd like to see the peak demands if you could provide them for the same years. Also, is the ASR system at Mannheim?
Yes.
To what extent are we using it?
We still use it. The ASR system is still being used over the summer periods to supplement water. It is also being used for when we need to take a well systems or Mannheim system down for maintenance purposes. So it provides both that peaking supply as well as maintenance supply, and provides us a secure backup supply for the region.
So it was a good decision.
It was a good decision.
And has helped us meet the peak demands.
So in 2016, you recall, we had a period of time where we had a spill in the Grand, and we actually took our Mannheim water treatment plant off for roughly 2 weeks plus, and we used the ASR system to supplement the water supply. And between the groundwater and the ASR, we were able to meet all the demands. That was the April event, and it demonstrated that how valuable the ASR is to the water supply system.
Oh, that's good. Thanks.
I guess seeing no other comments or questions, you can continue. I'm just still bewildered by the 575,000 savings, so just want to put that out there. It's very good.
On the wastewater side, we have 13 wastewater treatment plants. They range in size from 120 million liters a day to less than 1 million liter a day. We have one biosolids handling facility, which is our Manitou biosolids facility, and we have 6 pumping stations, and we're just in the throes of commissioning one more. In 2018, we treated 60 million cubic meters of wastewater. Again, here we track annually what our budgeted flows are and what our actuals are. And again, the green line shows you what we budgeted. The beige lines are our bars are the actual. And what's kind of interesting is you look at 2014 and you can see that the beige bar is actually higher than the green. And after that time, you can see that the green was a little bit higher than the actual. And if you think back to climate and climate change, this is really the impact of this lack of snow that we're seeing. So we haven't seen the same sort of snowpack, and it hasn't impacted us in the same way. So normally we would get some peak flows coming in January when we have a spring thaw in April, and we're not seeing those. So the impacts of climate change we're monitoring. We've been adjusting our budgeted flow. And for 2018, our actual flow was 59.9 million cubic meters, and we had budgeted 62.5 cubic meters. Taking this into consideration for 2019, we have been looking at reducing our flow and recognizing that impact of climate change, and we reduced the flow to 61.1 cubic meters for 2019. Yep.
Thank you. Right, I didn't even notice. It's okay. Through you, Chair Jowett. When you talk about the wastewater flow reducing and you relate it back to the snowpack, is there an element of infiltration being improved that also affects that?
Right. So normally with rain events and with the spring freshet, we would see increase in flows, and we still see those impacts of the rain event, but overall we are seeing that, you know, we're monitoring the snowpack over the last couple of years. We haven't seen it in the same way, and it hasn't impacted the wastewater treatment plants in the same way. So yes, there's I&I work going on in the local municipalities to improve or reduce I&I, but inflow and infiltration to reduce those. But we're also recognizing the impact of climate change as well.
Yep.
The operating budget for 2019 is proposed to be 44.5 million. This is an increase from 2018, but it's recognized that we are operating new infrastructure at our Kitchener wastewater treatment plant. So we have started to commission the new plants, the new filter system, and new systems at Waterloo. So some of these costs are related to our Aqua operating. Aqua is 25% represents about a base of about 7.7 million. And that's a 2% increase in their base, which is according to the contract terms that we have with them. We also carry in the Aqua budget a maintenance cost, which they have held steady at 900,000. And the third cost that we have is a contract adjustment cost. And that contract adjustment takes in account those type of changes that we have as a result of the capital upgrades that we're doing. For 2019, one of the major increases and changes that we're seeing is in the chemical costs. So when we did this last contract, we recognized that there were a lot of stresses and market conditions that can influence the chemicals that we buy. And so in this case, the contract adjustment is being impacted by polymers. And there is a reduction in the number of companies that supply polymers and in some of the raw materials. And that is causing the major increase in the contract adjustment costs for Aqua that is causing the contract to go up. When we negotiated this contract, those chemical costs we agreed to would be flow through, and we could adjust the contract amount for market conditions, and that was built into our contract. The other area where we've seen increases in our operating budget is in the utility costs. And it sits at approximately 20%, which represents about 8.6 million. And again, we're having more equipment. We're operating the effluent or the wastewater treatment plant to a higher standard. And we do have energy increases in our energy costs that we will realize in 2019. So we did increase our utility budget to accommodate this new equipment. In the wastewater budget, the 10-year capital program is at $526 million. We completed a biosolids and wastewater master plan last year. And when we did that, we were able to incorporate the recommendations into our capital program, and that helped reduce our 10-year capital program by $77 million. We also were able to look at some of our growth-related projects and look at the debt we had, and we were able to reduce our debt by $87 million. The major treatment upgrades that we'll be looking at over the next 10 years include Kitchener, Hespeler, and Galt. And even though we're working on finalizing in Kitchener the contract 3 and 4, we'll be starting a contract 5 over the next 10 years, which will be at $94 million. Our Hespeler wastewater treatment plant is getting some upgrades as well, and that's estimated at around $26 million. And Galt is also having some upgrades, which is estimated at $63 million. The growth projects, New Hamburg wastewater treatment plant, that project is underway right now. And the Waterloo project, we're working on how to best optimize and do that growth-related project in the future. So some budget efficiencies, again, through our, we saw some savings through our hydro. And one of the big changes was through our 3 largest plants, the Galt, Kitchener, and Waterloo wastewater treatment plant. We were able to move from what they call a Class B to a Class A program. And that allowed us to save a substantial amount in our hydro overhead. The global adjustment has also changed, and debt retirement was stopped in March of 2018. So we are seeing hydro savings from their overhead costs. We're using our online controls to optimize our aeration process or biological process in trying to improve treatment, but reducing the energy and process controls that we need. And on the biosolids side, we have been working on a study there with, again, those 3 facilities, Galt, Kitchener, and Waterloo, on how we treat and how we apply chemical to our biosolids to reduce costs. And the operating savings in wastewater was $560,000 for 2019. The hydro use, in this case, the story is slightly different. That is, we bring new systems on, our hydro costs go up. We have made a lot of smart decisions to try and reduce that increase or minimize that increase. And once we are operating the systems, we'll be able to look at optimizing those systems further. So in 2018, we used 42.7 million kilowatt hours of energy. And you can see up above, there's two lines. So the bars show you how much energy that we've consumed, and the lines above show you the cost. And you can see in 2018, there's a little triangle and a square. And the square is the $5.7 million is what we're being charged for hydro. And the triangle is what we would have been charged if we had not gone from the Class B to the Class A system. So I just thought it would be good to highlight some of those changes and decisions that were made. Program initiatives, again, under the lab, we have two types of inspections, an MOE and compliance inspection, and in wastewater, we have to meet both federal and provincial regulations, and we have been compliant to those. We are working on asset management, and we have updated and have over 24 asset condition assessments completed. And again, we're continuing to work on that new work management system and incorporate, which is called Lucity, and incorporating it into our system. Another area where we have done a lot of work is last year at the Kitchener plant. We have now commissioned our filter system and are treating to remove phosphorus or reduce the phosphorus from our treatment plants that's going back in the effluent going back into the Grand River. We also updated a number of our rural tertiary systems, and we continue our investment in the Rural Water Quality Program. We heard about that earlier with the GRCA. The Rural Water Quality Program does source protection for our Mannheim water treatment plant, but also protects and reduces the phosphorus in the Grand River. And we are looking at how to leverage the Rural Water Quality Program in some of our further work that we need to do for phosphorus removal. A little bit about innovation. We piloted a new process where we're using a chemical that destroys bacteria but isn't harmful to fish at our Hespeler treatment plant, and we're actually moving into installing that in our system. We're looking at a pilot in Elmira where we're able to treat more treat more sewage without building more infrastructure, and that pilot is going well, and we're looking at the next stage of that. And we just wanted to highlight that we also have completed our biosolids master plan, but we're able to successfully complete it, and we're recognized for 2 awards. One was the Utility of the Future from WEFTEC and the Water Environment Federation, and the other one was from the International Association of Public Participation for Engagement. So for the wholesale user rate, we're recommending that a 2.9% increase in water, which would make the rate $1.07 per cubic meter. And for wastewater, we're recommending a 6.9% increase, which would make the rate $1.25 per cubic meter. Based on 204 cubic meters of consumption, that cost annually would be $475. And in case you were wondering, you could, for $1, fill your water bottle 900 times, a little bit over 900 times, based on this rate. On the retail side, sorry, yes?
It's me, sorry about that. I was paying attention too much and not here. Chair Redmond.
I'm sorry, I just can't help but make the observation that that's a way better deal than a buck of beer.
For the retail rate, there we're recommending for the water $2.99 per cubic meter with a $10 monthly flat charge, and for wastewater a $2.23 per cubic meter charge with a $8 monthly charge. The household costs based on 204 cubic meters annually would be $730 for water and $551 for wastewater. And not everyone has water and wastewater services in the township, so that's why we separate it out. And again, for $1, you can fill your water bottle over 320 times.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just for clarification, so when we talk about the wholesale rate is what the region is selling it to the local municipalities for, correct?
That's correct.
And the retail rate here then is what the local municipality delivers it to the resident?
This is only for North Dumfries and Wellesley. So the region owns and operates North Dumfries and Wellesley distribution and collection systems. So this rate would only apply for North Dumfries and Wellesley.
Thank you.
Okay, to proceed. Thanks, Nancy.
Thank you. Okay.
Oh, we're up for questions, and that was the only one, so nothing burning. Okay. Thanks.
So while we're flipping back to my presentation, I've got a small number of slides to conclude the conversation today with respect to user rate budgets. True to form, I'm going to focus for the most part on the capital side, and in particular the capital financing challenges and opportunities with respect to the water and wastewater budget. So on the water side, again, anticipating a small surplus on the revenue side for 2018. Flow volumes decreased just slightly in the 2019 budget. Overall budgeted costs up by about $300,000. On the wastewater side, you may recall that we had been projecting a shortfall, revenue shortfall at one point, I think in excess of perhaps $4 million. Latest estimates or most recent information for 2018 suggests that it's around $3 million, and we have a number of expenditure offsets to that $3 million as well, and so we'll be reporting that through our year-end financial report, which will come forward at some point in March. We have made, you recall the slide that Nancy showed with respect to budgeted versus actual flows on the wastewater side in 2018, and the flows being less than anticipated. So we have made a downward adjustment on the flow volume for 2019 to reflect the most recent trends. Overall costs up about $900,000. And you'll see on here the bottom point regarding the Grand River Conservation Authority levy. The 2018 budget had been approved before we became aware of the change last year, so we've now made the adjustment to reflect the new apportionment formula with respect to the 2019 budget. And so from a rate perspective, the rates that are contemplated for 2019 are as projected in the 2018 model, and you can see them here on slide 12 of the presentation. Total cost, as indicated in Nancy's presentation, $475, a wholesale increase of about $22 in 2019. There are two budget issue papers with respect to water services. One is the addition of a position with respect to source protection planning, and that'll allow us to deliver the various source protection plans that we have underway, and the conversion of one existing water supervisor from a temporary to a permanent position. More detailed descriptions of those issue papers are available in the issue paper package. I want to talk just a little bit about capital financing. I've got 3 slides on water and then the same 3 slides on wastewater to illustrate where we're at from a funding perspective. And as we've discussed before, on the water side, we have 2 main sources of funding that we look to. We have user rates and we have development charges. On the user rate side, we make contributions to capital reserves every year and then use that funding to fund what we refer to as the non-growth portion of the water and wastewater capital program. So this is our state of good repair, asset renewal type expenditures. And you can see here that on the water side, almost all of our asset renewal capital expenditures are funded from reserves, which is a really good sign. It's a sign that it's a sign that the amount that we're setting aside each year in the budget is generally sufficient to fund the non-growth portion of our capital program. So from a long-term financial sustainability perspective, I think this puts us in a really good place. A little more of a challenge on the development charge side. Because water and wastewater infrastructure has to be in place before development occurs, we're often put in a situation of looking to long-term borrowing to fund the capital costs as we incur them. And as you can see here, we have about a 50-50 split on the development charge side between development charges that we have in reserve and long-term borrowing. So it's almost $100 million of long-term borrowing over the next 10 years. And so that's something that we're looking at. We're going to explore further through the development charges background study and look for opportunities to reduce the amount of debt we anticipate having to issue. Because when we issue debt, we have to pay the debt servicing costs. And this is what you see here on this slide. We have a very, very small amount of existing water debt scheduled to be fully paid off by the time we get to 2021. But again, based on the capital forecast, we have some user rate debt and some new development charge debt. And it's that green part on this chart. That's the piece that we need to spend some additional time on and figure out how to manage as we go forward. The debt servicing costs, of course, then come into play. Debt servicing comes down on our existing debt by 2021, is fully paid off. And then you can see if we issued the debt that's contemplated in the budget right now, we would end up with debt servicing costs in about the $3.5 million range by 2024. So we'll come back with additional options as we run through the development charge background study over the first 6 months of this year. Wastewater is a similar, I'd say a very similar story. You can see here on the user rate side, virtually all of our asset renewal work funded from the user rates without, and just a very, very small amount of borrowing required on that side. Again, about a 55-45 split in terms of reserves and debt, about $100 million of debt for wastewater, growth-related debt for wastewater, also contemplated over the next 10 years. The debt graph is a very different story, though. We have issued fairly significant amounts of debt for wastewater in the past, largely related to the extensive work at the Kitchener Wastewater Treatment Plant. And this is the forecast of debt outstanding. We have about $200 million of debt outstanding now. Most of that debt was issued over 20 years. So you can see it gradually being paid off as we work over the next 10 years. And then some additional growth-related debt to be issued as we saw on the previous slide. Debt servicing costs, if that happened, would increase from about $17 million to about 21 or 22 million over the next 5 or 6 years. So overall, in terms of key messages, rate increases on the user rate side, entirely consistent with what was contemplated last year. I would say state of good repair, capital works, very well funded on both the water and wastewater side, and we do need to take a closer look at the growth-related debt for water and wastewater that's contemplated through the background study. Today, obviously, detailed review of user rate budgets, and our schedule contemplates approval of the user rate budgets and the revised rates at this committee's next meeting on February the 6th. And I'll pause there, Madam Chair, before we move on to the tax-supported budget.
Okay. Councillor Galloway, we'll come in for you.
Well, thank you, Madam Chair. Craig, I wanted to just pursue a little bit the revenue shortfall in wastewater, $3.1 million, 4.3%. So can you go over again what happened or what we understand to have happened for that revenue shortfall?
So through you, Madam Chair. So if you think back to the slide that Nancy showed that showed the budgeted and actual flows over the last 3 or 4 years, the actual flows have been less than budgeted. So the revenue projection, and on the water and wastewater sides, we prepare what I would call, a balanced budget. We have our expenditures, we have revenues to match. The revenues on the actual side have been lower than the budgeted amount over the last couple of years. And that's what we've experienced in 2018 as well. So we're in a process of gradually bringing down the flow volumes in order to better match what our experience has been over the last couple of years. The challenge, of course, is if we bring those flow volumes down too quickly, then that has an upward pressure on the rate. And so staff within Water Services and Finance spent a fair bit of time in the fall looking at different models and estimates of how we get the flow volumes to reflect, what we're currently receiving. And I think there's a 2 or 3 year, looking for some confirmation, 2 or 3 year, I'd say phased adjustment to bring the wastewater flows down to what we're experiencing now. Now, overall, from a year-end perspective, revenue shortfall of around $3 million, subject to completing our year-end processes. As I mentioned, we do have some offsetting savings that will bring the overall variance well below that number. And it's that net number that will then look to fund from the rate stabilization reserve. Does that answer your question?
Well, it does, but it raises some other questions, and I don't know, maybe Nancy can answer these, or maybe you can. So there's a relationship between water supply and wastewater. So, you water into the house, water out of the house, there's loss along the way, so you would expect your wastewater flows to be less than your water volumes. Isn't there some kind of a standard relationship between the two, and why is it changing? And I guess it just begs the question whether or not we've got leak problems.
I'll hand this one off.
So on the wholesale rate, I'll just remind you that we charge based on what we sell, so our flow meters, and on the wastewater side, we charge what is coming into our treatment plants. So there is a relationship. We are seeing generally that the per capita demands both for water and wastewater are going down throughout the region. But yes, on the wastewater side, wet weather, inflow and infiltration are impacting the wastewater. And that's always been why it's been harder to determine the flow. So there is a pattern. The water flows or water demands are lower than the wastewater flows. And so the difference, part of that is the inflow and infiltration impact.
So you don't have a concern about leakage? A major concern about
So you mean leakage on the water side?
On the water side. Primarily on the water side.
Yeah.
Because it's under pressure.
Well, the municipalities are also looking at water loss. And so they do track what their revenues are and what they're selling to the households and what they're buying from us. So they do look at water loss, and they do track that as well, as we do for North Dumfries and Ayr.
I'm just trying to figure out in my own mind why that relationship is changing between water supply and wastewater. We've been generally pretty close to predicting it, and if it's going down, then why is it going down on the wastewater side?
So for the wastewater side, I don't know, the main impact is climate change. So what we used to see when we look at the annual flows, and we go back historically, we used to see a real impact in January when we had our kind of January thaw and in the spring. And that would be the contribution of the snow melting and getting into the pipes, into the sanitary system and coming to the treatment plant. And when it comes through our flow meter, we can't recognize whether that's drinking water or storm water or something else. It's just coming into the treatment plant. Mm-hmm. And what we've been observing over the last couple of years, in particular since 2015, is we're not seeing the snow. And of course, we're not seeing that same impact into our system. So part of it is they're improving their collection systems, they're tightening up, they're investing in the infrastructure. We've seen that. We see that because the peak events are lower as well when we track the rain events. But very much is the impact of not having that snowpack. So climate change is impacting us.
Well, it's a good thing that, I mean, it's not a bad thing that the flows are lower and that we don't have to source as much water, or per capita at least, or even if we don't have to treat as much, that's not necessarily a bad thing. But I guess we just have to kind of re-gauge that relationship if climate change is really having that kind of impact. Thank you.
Not quite yet, Nancy. I think this might be for you. Elizabeth. Sorry, Councillor Clark.
It's actually not for Nancy. It might be for Craig. I'm just wondering whether we're going to actually have the GRT fares as part of the presentation. I know they're referenced in the report. I have a question about those, and I'm not sure when the right time is to ask them. Later.
Yes, once we conclude the user rate part, we'll get into the tax-supported budget. I'll give a quick overview of that information paper, and there'll be an opportunity to...
Okay, fine. I was just looking at the fares as a user rate, but that's semantics. Thank you.
Understood.
Councillor Foxton.
Nancy, can you come back, please? Through the chair, thank you. You wearing your Fitbit? Yeah. So in regards to North Dumfries and mostly the community of Ayr, there's been significant water main breaks multiple times, so that you will see on a given street a break and it being repaired one day, and then 2 to 3 days later, just a foot or so from the original break, it breaking again, and a few days later, it breaking again. So clearly, there's numerous breaks in North Dumfries all the time. Are we looking at some way of trying to mitigate this? Because there's extreme losses. I believe right now there's a mini lake developing.
So we have been working with a consultant that I think in 2018 they did a bit of a satellite scan to look at all the distribution systems in the region, trying to identify where leaks are. We have now gone to what they call a district metering system. So we've installed some different flow metering and pressure sensors throughout the distribution system in Ayr to try and better identify where those leaks are. Unfortunately, in some areas of the distribution system, the type of original installation, they're seeing problems with that, with the service connections, and they do create leaks. So we are correcting them when they see them. All we can ask is that homeowners call us and let us know if they suspect there is a leak in their area. But we are doing work to try and identify where these problem areas are, and then identify how we can best address them.
Okay.
Madam Chair, can I go? Thank you. Maybe we can touch base about the little lake that's developing, and it will not fall under GRTA's jurisdiction. Thank you.
For now. Councillor Erb, don't go anywhere, Nancy.
I'm sorry. Thank you. This, I think, is back to Craig, and I apologize for going back a couple of screens related to the development charges. Is that the ratio of what's in reserves and what's been debt? Is that consistent for these last? Like, is that overall how it's gone? That ratio? If I'm reading this right, 45% is funded from reserves and the rest through debt?
I'm just going to go back here to the slide.
Is that historically the way it's worked?
It's a really good question. The answer is probably not. And I say that in particular because over the last few years, I would say since about 2013, we have issued a significant amount of growth-related debt for the Kitchener wastewater treatment plant expansion. So I think if we went back and looked at actual experience over the last few years, we might see a higher debt number, at least in a couple of those years. So it will vary to a certain extent, and I don't know that there's necessarily a right number. The main concern that I have here is really just with respect to the region's overall amount of debt. So when we look at our capital program, look out over the next 10 years, we have about $200 million of growth-related debt to issue for water and wastewater. And every time we issue debt for growth-related purposes, we're then counting on a certain level of development charge collections in future years to pay the debt servicing costs, right? So we just think about the cash flow here for a second. The work gets done, we pay the contractor, right? So that money's out the door, we then have to fund it. If we don't have it available in reserves, then we borrow for it. That funds that expenditure, but then we have 10, 15, or 20 years of debt servicing costs, and we're relying on future collections in order to fund those debt servicing costs. And so the concerns are, what is the level of debt servicing costs, and will we generate enough revenue even in the event of a downturn where development is reduced and therefore development charge collections are reduced? Are we going to get enough revenue in order to fund those debt servicing costs? That's the first challenge. Second challenge is just in terms of overall debt outstanding and from a credit rating perspective, are we getting ourselves into a position where the credit rating agencies are looking at us and saying, your overall amount of debt is too high, your AAA credit rating is at risk? So there's kind of two different lenses that we look at as we figure out how to find that right mix of funding from reserves and funding from debt, both from a development charge perspective and in this case from a user rate perspective as well. And we'll have the exact same conversation when we get into the tax-supported capital budget as well.
Okay, thank you.
See anything? No more questions here. So thank you.
Okay, thank you. So just a quick time check, Madam Chair. We have about an hour and 20 minutes left. I'm quite prepared to keep going. If there was a need for a quick break, this might be an ideal time as we change topics.
Perfect.
I'll leave it to you.
Appreciate that. Yeah, I think that's a good idea. 10, 15, 10? 10?
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Craig.
Hey, Douglas. Similar like grass. Oh yeah. It's not unusual. I should go back there right now. Next door, I went 12 years ago. But you had a few birds nests. Oh yeah. But yeah, there's always. One thing, it's not moving forward a day or really good job, but he was right after 7. And unfortunately, I was like, I made a point of it. It's Saturday, I gotta get up and I'm trying to get to my kid, get up, get it out, because, you know, so he comes out, do I say anything to him? Yeah, so I think we can put it on first, look at the box. Stuff that they've come here, so they're not going to like. He did it. I don't say anything, put it all up. I said,
Let me know.
Okay, we're ready to resume with Craig, if everyone can take their seats. Tom, take your seat. Take your seat. Don't make me come over there.
Okay, thank you, Madam Chair. We're going to now turn our attention to the tax-supported budget, and we have a number of different pieces to get through here. Some I'm going to go through fairly quickly. There's a couple of these items that we should, I think, spend a little bit of time on to discuss. And so we're going to start right off with some housekeeping adjustments. So on the first page of the agenda, actually, I'm sorry, the second page of the agenda, we have three relatively minor adjustments that we're proposing to be made to the tax-supported budget. The first relates to the levy notice that we received from MPAC, which is about $31,000 less than we had in the budget. So we're recommending that adjustment. We've also been advised of some additional federal funding for homelessness initiatives, $109,000. And so we should amend the 2019 preliminary operating budget for housing services to reflect that additional funding. And I believe a report on that funding and the plan of how it will be used is scheduled to come forward to Community Services Committee on January 29th. And then finally, a couple of adjustments to the airport capital program. We had inadvertently included the cost of one project twice. So there's one project that should come out of 2027 and one project that was required in 2019 that is no longer required. So staff recommend those three changes be made, and I think it would be appropriate to take them all at once. Okay, thank you, Madam Chair. And I apologize, I don't have a slide for this one, but also on the agenda is one item that was referred to Budget Committee last week from the Community Services Committee. And this relates to a one-year funding agreement for the Shelter Transition Partnership Pilot for Emergency Shelter to be operated by the Cambridge Shelter Corporation. There was a series of recommendations that were approved, including amending the 2019 housing budget by $244,741 to be funded from the Tax Stabilization Reserve. So I think it would be appropriate for Budget Committee to consider that recommendation at this point. It has no impact on the property tax levy. Great, thank you, Madam Chair. So overall, in terms of, so just a reminder of where our starting point today was a very minor adjustment just now for assessment delivery services by MPAC. A little bit of rounding here, still basically sitting at 1.85%, and I'll give you an update on the police budget and the overall status as we get later into the presentation. I'm just going to gloss over the economic environment. We went through this in some detail at the meeting back in December. I think all of our key messages continue to remain in place. Nothing substantial has changed on that front since last year, or late last year. We have a number of base budget pressures. I'm going to go through a couple of them. I'm not intending to go through all of them. There is some detail in the report. But we do want to talk about annualization of issue papers, a little bit about infrastructure funding and downtown core exemptions, and then we're going to turn our attention to budget issue papers. So first of all, in terms of the major budget pressures, the first one, as we talked about last time, was the annualization of program expansions, issue papers approved in the 2018 budget, adds about $2.4 million into the 2019 budget. That is reflected in the base budget figures that we presented back in December. On the infrastructure funding side, we've talked before about moving to a more sustainable way of funding our asset renewal, state of good repair type expenditures. We've been working towards full funding of all of our vehicle replacements. I would say we're there with the exception of GRT transit buses, and that will take a longer term strategy to get us to that point. But we have been increasing funding for our facilities, and in the 2019 budget, we've included a provision to fund some of the waste management capital program, which to this point has been almost entirely funded by debt issuance. And so built into the budget is about $3.6 million in increased funding for capital, which, if approved, overall would allow us to avoid about $36 million of debt issuance over the next 10 years and the resulting interest that would be paid on that debt over that period, which amounts to, over the life of that debt, about $7.3 million. This is a fairly significant shortfall that we're trying to get at, and I have a slide later in the presentation that quantifies it. I do want to talk just a little bit about development charge exemptions. Going back to the period of 1999 to 2009, the region did provide core area development charge exemptions to all 7 municipalities. That policy was changed in 2009 to match any policy provided by the local municipality. And that was further changed in 2014 with the introduction of an expiry date of the exemption, and that will be on February 28th of this year. I'll pass over the history. Why this is important is that a voluntary or discretionary development charge exemption must be funded. Staff brought forward a report back in late 2017 to establish a funding strategy because we are, what we know will happen and what is happening is a significant number of building permits coming through before the exemption will require a significant amount of funding of those exemptions. The strategy was to fund those exemptions over 10 years. And the key piece from a budget perspective is on the transportation side. So within the roads budget, we introduced $750,000 of funding in 2018. There's a further $750,000 in the 2019 budget, and we're anticipating a final approximately $750,000 in 2020. That being said, we are updating our estimates, and we intend to report back at the February 6th Budget Committee meeting with an update of what we think the overall costs of the exemptions will be. Moving on to provincial subsidies, this is a repeat from last time, but just as a reminder, we have about $270 million of provincial funding reflected in our budget. We did get notice last week on the item at the top of this list, the transit. This is the provincial gas tax funding announced basically at the level that we've budgeted for 2019, so no budget adjustments required there. But obviously some uncertainty around some of those figures with respect to the level of funding that we may get from the province in 2019. One of the requests we had last time was for some additional details on base budget reductions. We advised that we had identified about $2.2 million in total of reductions, about 1.1 in user rates, 1.1 in the tax levy, and so we further classified those reductions to supplies, utilities, fuel, maintenance, about $545,000. Services and consultants and grants, about another $250,000, some minor program support costs of $64,000, and some staffing related costs of $285,000. So that's kind of the breakdown on the tax side of that $1.1 million. Now, turning our attention to budget issue papers, which I think is going to be the main focus for the next 45 minutes or so. We have a package of budget issue papers that was distributed back in December. I'd like to go through some of those issue papers now. Probably not all of them. Some of them we have on a summarized level. Some of the more significant ones we want to provide some information on. And this is certainly a good opportunity for Council to ask any questions about those issue papers. We have staff here prepared to respond to those questions and provide as much clarity as we can about what's being proposed for 2019. At a high level, The cost of those issue papers is about $10 million in total. There'd be about $6.3 million would be reflected in the 2019 budget if approved. Annualization about another $3.4 million. So it is important for us to be aware of the decisions that we're making in the 2019 budget that have implications going into 2020. There are a couple of issue papers that actually don't have a levy impact, at least not directly. We have requests for additional facility project management staff to complete facility-related projects to a certain extent coming out of master plans, but also on the asset renewal side as well. These positions would be charged back to capital projects and recovered that way. So however the capital project is funded, it's that source of funding that would ultimately fund the cost of the staff positions. And I would say the costs themselves are already reflected in the capital budget itself. So this is just the resources that we believe are required in order to complete those projects in 2019 and into the future. And then on the Provincial Offences Act side, we have a request for additional staff on both the prosecution and administrative side, 3 positions in total, and they would be funded from incremental POA fine revenues. And so turning to the issue papers that do have a direct impact on the levy heading into 2019 and then 2020, what we've got is a series of slides here that summarizes some of the more high priority issue papers and what the impacts are, estimated impacts are for 2019 and then into 2020. So starting off with senior services, we have a request for, we know we need to be mindful of acronyms here. We have a request for additional personal support workers at Sunnyside Home. In total, it works out to about 12 FTEs. There's 2 set, and again, as a reminder, FTEs, full-time equivalent position, works out to about 12 full-time equivalent positions. Overall cost, about $300,000 in 2019 and an additional $100,000 in 2020. And this just reflects the timing of when the staff would be brought on board. They would come on at some point in the second quarter of this year and then be fully annualized into 2020 at a cost of $381,000. On the paramedic services side, this is an important one. The continued implementation of the paramedic services master plan proposed are 2 12-hour ambulance shifts coming into effect on July the 1st of 2019. Requires 10 paramedics and 2 support staff and of course the vehicles in order to provide that service. We have split the issue paper into 2 pieces, 2 bundles, if you will, with the first being about half of the staff positions and the vehicles with an annualized cost of just over $500,000. And then the second shift, the staff positions, annualized at about $400,000.
So Craig,
this costing presumes that the province will continue its approach to funding paramedic services, which is at a 50-50 rate. I think as we discussed last time, the subsidy though always lags behind 1 year. And so we're proposing to continue our approach of using the tax stabilization reserve to essentially phase in that funding requirement over the 3 years. So we'd have some tax stabilization reserve funding in the first year when we wouldn't be receiving any subsidy. The assumption is that subsidy will be received then over the next 2 years.
So Craig, if I can just hold there for a question.
Certainly.
Actually, there's a couple. So Councillor Urbanovic.
Thanks. If we can just go back to the previous slide. I'm wondering if you can just talk a little bit about the changes that are happening in terms of the senior services. And I mean, are we seeing more patients? I think it's important to talk about this because we're talking about 12 FTEs.
Yeah, and perhaps I could look to Mr. Bartholomew Saunders to help out with that one.
Thank you. Through you, Madam Chair. There are a few things happening. One is that we are almost at, I think it's 96% of our residents are coming in as emergency admissions, which is quite different than how residents used to come in. So these are high acuity, high needs, often folks with high behavioral responses, and in some cases need, or in many cases need one-on-one support. So part of what's being asked here is to have a group of staff that will be available for providing that one-on-one support that typically we draw from our casual pool from, but as we draw from that, we don't have enough staff then to cover off sick, vacation, nights, weekends, et cetera. The other staff, the other, I think, 4.3 FTEs are specifically for the night shift where we typically have issues having sufficient staff on the floor to manage the night shift. So it's a combination of two different things. One is the higher acuity levels, the more of the responsive behaviors, and the other is simply just to manage the ratios more effectively.
And what do we think our chances are of being able to recruit these individuals? I mean, I imagine that we're probably considered a preferred employer, but we know that there is a fairly significant shortage of PSWs. And so do we have any sense of how much that might be an issue or problem?
Can't say for sure. I don't think we typically don't have an issue recruiting PSWs. The issue is whether or not they're on contract. If they're on contract, they often have several jobs that they're trying to manage. So the issue is ensuring that they're available for shift, but we have not historically had difficulties recruiting.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you for that. Craig, I was actually going to ask a question if I can do that for a second. And it's kind of the same, similar to what Barry's asking, only it's a bit more of a general approach in that maybe Jane Albright can help us with this. The rate of attrition in what you're predicting for employees, is the rate of attrition going, are you watching to be able to make sure it doesn't outpace our ability to sustain appropriate staff levels, let alone gain more because of the demographic shifts that are in place? I mean, I bring an example like ambulance workers. We're buying trucks. We know we're going to struggle to get ambulance employees, you know, those kinds of tenants. So are we watching the metrics? Are we paying attention to some of those challenges that other communities are starting to express concern to?
Through you, Madam Chair, we have actually changed our recruiting process to ensure that we're better equipped to deal with the gaps in Sunnyside. And so we've moved to a bulk hiring process. That means as vacancies occur, we just slot people in from a group of successful hires, and we're running those more frequently as those vacancies occur. So we're acutely aware of the demand for the staff as well as the shortages that we seem to find in terms of getting them in. So we've actually adjusted our processes so we recruit more at the right time because they're not paid unless they're working. So being able to have people to fill lines as they become available has been the priority for Sunnyside.
Appreciate it. So in general, is that a new practice throughout human resources, throughout the different departments?
As we identify areas that have those type of specific requirements, GRT would be another example where we've also changed our practice, that rather than going through batch hiring a couple of times a year, there's a continuous intake process in order to ensure that we have operators. So we're just monitoring where those trends happen and adjust those accordingly.
Appreciate that. Okay, Craig. It's all yours. No, oh, sorry, Sue. And so is Elizabeth. My mistake.
Thank you, Chair.
Right. There you go, Sue.
Thank you. And Craig, it's not just to you, but to us as a whole, and maybe the chief as well. So we put 2 new ambulances in, and it worked well and brought down response time for 2 months, and then they sat also in hospitals in different situations. And we're going to get, when we say 2 12-hour ambulance shifts, what does that mean exactly? Does it mean 2 new ambulances on the road or at increasing shift? How do we prevent them being parked at the hospital? See, I don't think we've dealt with the issue of offload. And once again, I'd like to recommend that we look at hiring even a unionized staff or 2 in the hospitals that these patients can be offloaded to so that we can free up ambulances.
So through you, Madam Chair. So one issue with the hiring of a unionized staff to place in the hospital is that ONA considers that contracting out, and we can't do that. We've asked that question before. So for us to put our staff member in the hospital, that's, I'll say, a no-no. But we're happy to talk to the hospital, and I know that there's some work that's going underway with regards to the offload delay through Mr. Murray when the new CEOs start in the hospital to directly address the offload delay and what they're prepared to do for that, and there'll be more coming in the future on that.
So Mike, is this in reference to the current?
There we go. Yeah, so just to reinforce what Chief Van Valkenburg said, I've actually talked to each of the hospital CEOs, and I'm trying to set up a session with them in mid to late February after the new CEO at St. Mary's starts. We've shared with them all the offload delay data. I think they were, in general, aware of the problem. I don't think they realized how significant it was. And I think they're all, totally committed to working with us to try to improve it. So that's one comment. So that we're working on that. The other thing, I think probably at the next Community Services Committee, either next Community Services Committee or next budget meeting, Stephen is going to have an update on some of the stats. So response time stats, unit utilization stats, offload delay stats, and so on, just to give you a little bit more context for this issue paper.
Thanks for that, Mike. Okay, so Barry, is this in reference to this?
Yeah.
Okay, sorry.
Thanks. Just on this as well, and I guess kind of linked to the motion that we passed at Council last week around dispatch as well. One of the things that I've recently learned that's been different in, I guess, Niagara and Toronto on a trial basis in terms of the dispatch is that as a way of trying to deal with this, who ultimately ends up going to the hospitals and so on, is there's a connection to a doctor, I guess, at the hospitals that the ambulances communicate with. I know it kind of sounds almost like back in the old days when we watched Squad 51 or whatever in Rampart. But I guess the whole bit where I was going with it is that something that we should be looking at and pursuing as part of this mix as well, and seeing if that can help us try to do better in terms of our times and our offload delays, or try to avoid them in total?
So through you, Madam Chair, so I might need a little bit of clarification as to the doctor. So we do have a base hospital doctor that our crews can speak with on transported patients, because currently under legislation, the only place we can take a patient is to a hospital. Niagara did try a pilot project where they were transporting patients to urgent care centers. But that wasn't necessarily done through a doctor. It was done by predetermined parameters for the patient. And Toronto had done the same at one time as well. So I'm not sure if that's what we're speaking of, or we're talking about community paramedicine.
It sounded like base hospital doctor, but I'll send you the information that was sent to me, and absolutely, you can we can have an offline on it then.
Yeah, absolutely.
Thanks.
Not yet.
Okay.
Councillor Foxton, is this?
So, I thought that it was our union staff, the EMS union staff, that the hospital, but it's actually hospital staff. So, and that's under the LHIN, right? So we do have to find a solution to this, and I'm glad you're meeting, Mr. Murray, with the hospital staffs, because firefighters, like any of our police services or firemen or anything else, these people are doers. To have them sit idly by and wait and waste their time is a demotivator, and it's stressful for them. Actually, if you take a doer and make them sit and do nothing, you're stressing them. So we do need to deal with it, as well as the cost value that we're having. So thank you, Chief. Thank you, Mike.
And Councillor Clark.
Not for you. It's actually
Thank you for your patience.
Thanks. It's actually for Craig, and it's just a couple simple things. First of all, thank you for your caution against using acronyms. Some of us were at a communications training last week where the trainer noted that municipal staff are the worst offenders for using jargon and acronyms, and I have to say that's absolutely true. So thank you.
I think we would have pointed at the province.
But also just a question in terms of presentation. My recollection, and it may be wrong, is that in previous years the budget issue papers were sort of presented in order of priority from staff's perspective. I didn't see that noted this time. Maybe I missed it. But is that still the case? Should we read it? Should we read them?
I think you can, if you look at the summary that's either at the front of the budget issue paper package from last month, and I think is also attached as an appendix to today's report, you can generally look at that list as a priority.
As a priority list, okay. Yes. Thank you, that's it.
Okay.
Okay, I can move off of paramedic services.
Looking good.
Okay. Okay, we'll turn our attention to transit then. We have a series of issue papers relating to GRT, and we'll start with the most significant and similar to ones that we've seen over the last several years, which is the implementation of the GRT business plan, which contemplates the addition of 35,000 hours of service a year, each year, I think over the next 7 years. So this year's issue paper has two bundles, one for 25,000 hours and another for 10,000 hours. And bundle one is the new Coronation I Express Route 206 and various route realignments. And bundle two is the improved service frequency on a number of different routes. In total annualized costs, so when I'm referring to total annualized cost, this is the total property tax impact on an fully annualized basis, about $2.9 million, of which 2.4 would be in 2019 and an additional $500,000 in 2020. Staying with transit, the Conestoga College UPass, you'll recall that the Conestoga College students held a referendum, I'm going to say last fall, and supported, endorsed the introduction of a UPass similar to the one that's in place, or perhaps identical to the one that's in place at the University of Waterloo and at Wilfrid Laurier, would require an estimated additional 15,000 annual service hours with an estimated cost, so an estimated net cost, so net of the fare revenue, net of the UPass revenue that would be generated, of about $900,000, $600,000 in 19, and an incremental 266 in 2020. So 35,000 hours for the GRT business plan, 15,000 hours for the Conestoga College UPass. And then again, continuing with transit services, in the same way that we're implementing the GRT business plan, this issue paper is for the continued implementation of the Mobility Plus business plan, and would result in the addition of 2 new vehicles to meet the demands, as well as the staffing and operation costs associated with those vehicles. Net of any fare revenue, estimated cost of in total of $354,000. Again, split between the two, incrementally split between the 2 years, as shown on slide 44.
So hold up for just a second, please, Craig. Councillor Shantz.
Thank you. I just wanted to speak to the transit issue page, or the Kiwanis transit issue page. When we started working with GRT for the pilot project, we understood that the pilot project would carry through to the end of this year, which it shows in the budget issue paper. But we also understood that Kiwanis Transit would continue to operate it for that period of time. When I talked to Cheryl, who is the executive director of Kiwanis Transit, her cost is considerably less than the cost that's outlined in the budget issue paper. So the process that that we thought we were going through was that Kiwanis Transit would continue to run it, but that the region would fund it starting in March. And so I guess I'm a little confused at what happened, that we're putting a higher amount in for that budget issue paper and using a different provider when it costs more, and the pilot project isn't over yet.
Right. So, through Madam Chair, I'm going to look for Peter Zink to help out on this one. And just in terms of following along, I jumped ahead a couple of slides. So I think the issue paper that's being questioned is the bottom one on this page. So I believe the transit service expansion to Route 21 in Woolwich.
Did I get ahead of you?
Just a little bit, but it's fine. It's no problem. Let's deal with the question.
Through you, Madam Chair. In response, Councillor, we, in developing the plan last year with the township, staff was moving forward with the initiation of a Bus Plus services because that's similar and consistent with what we do through other areas of the region. I know staff has recently spoken with township officials about this issue, and there's a call yesterday, and there's another call early next week to review that. Part of the explanation for the cost differences would be the vehicle type, which is our plan had been for a low floor vehicle, which is significantly more expensive than a high floor vehicle. There are other sort of differences in that. We're going to work through that with township staff and further those discussions next week.
So part of the understanding was also that Kiwanis Transit would have an opportunity to maybe pick up that route, that there would be some kind of a process that could look at that. So I guess I'm not quite sure where to go from here with the issue paper, and maybe it's something we wait until the next meeting to finalize where we go in terms of cost.
Yes, so through you, Madam Chair, absolutely. So today is certainly wasn't expected to be a decision-making day about issue papers. So my suggestion would be that we continue the conversations that are proposed at a staff level and bring back some additional information to answer some of those questions at the Budget Committee's next meeting. And we have 2 more meetings before final decisions on issue papers will be required.
Okay, I hope that we can have enough conversation to resolve the issues before we have to make that final decision. Thank you.
Good. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Jaworski?
Not Dave.
I'm trying my best here.
Good for you.
I'm trying my best.
Chair. Through the chair, and I'll ask the clerk to listen, and she may have the answer. On when we do the Uber licensing, I know we had some fees come in for that, and I think some of it was directed towards, I thought, mobility services, but I'm not sure what our plan is for that and how we plan to use it. I don't recall. I'm not sure if that can offset some of this.
So we have a committee that meets probably about once a year to talk about things that are in the queue for money, and that meeting has not been scheduled yet. It's towards the end of this month, and so we will be discussing both this issue paper, a proposal from the taxi industry, as well as whether or not we want to continue with any taxi script money. But it certainly will be done before February 6th.
And if I may add to that, so this is the issue paper that we're referring to, and on page 44 of the overall issue paper package, we are showing, in terms of the costing of this issue paper, about $60,000 from that accessibility reserve as a source of funding towards the acquisition of the buses.
And Councillor Galway.
Well, thanks, Madam Chair. Just on the matter that Councillor Shantz has brought up, we did have a brief conversation on that. I think that we should ask staff specifically to compare the proposition in the issue paper with what Kiwanis Transit can provide in terms of cost as well as the service level, because they are doing the pilot. It would really just be a continuation of what they're doing. That might make some sense, and if the cost is that much more reasonable, it might be something we should seriously consider.
We'll make sure that that's part of the information we report back with.
Okay, I understand.
And so, Craig, I just have a quick question with regard to Conestoga College UPass. And historically, didn't we, so when I sat on the board at Conestoga College, I remember the student rep at the time was quite disappointed on behalf of the students. So I think they sent something to us and we offered it to them and they refused it. So is this just based on whatever student rep is there, or is this a different thing? It's just in order to prioritize it, I just want to know how come it's sort of changed. Oh.
So if I recall what happened, last time, Council approved funding for the UPass in the budget, and then the vote went to the students at Conestoga College, and they did not get a sufficient support for it to be to actually be put in place. And if I recall now, we actually then amended our budget to take that piece out. So now the timing, I think, is more helpful in the sense that the referendum has happened, the vote has taken place, and now it's up to council to determine if this is the service that they wish to provide.
Much appreciated. Okay, and Councillor Harris.
Yeah, on that matter, and forgive me if this has been answered at a previous council, knowing that there's a few newbies here. On that note, there has been some questions, I guess, raised of ourselves as to why there is a delta between the cost for a university student and a college student. I'm wondering if you can help add some clarity as to why that specifically is.
Yeah, I don't think I can do it off the top of my head. I'm not sure if Peter can help out with that, and if not, we can certainly bring that information back.
I see it's obvious the investment that we're making in addition to the revenue that we're going to generate from that particular pass, but I think it's...
Through you, Madam Chair. The difference in the cost is essentially due to the more isolated nature of the college and delivering service to there. It doesn't have the density of transit service around. It costs more to get services there, so that's reflected in the price. The referendum did state the price that you see in front of you.
All right, and then when I've got the microphone, there was some additional expenditures that we're going to incur on collections of fines. I guess this is a different matter other than the Conestoga thing. So there was some changes or a regulation that was going to be adopted, if it wasn't already, on uncollected fines. Where are we at with that? And does that impact our bottom line at all? And have we in fact started to generate or collect on these uncollected fines? Because I know that was a long time thing that was coming, and I know it's close, if not already been enacted, and will we see a benefit to that?
I'll look to the regional clerk to bail me out on that one.
So there were changes with respect to plate denial rules that were put in place with respect to POA fines. And to date, we have not seen a significant shift in the total number of dollars coming back into the region at this point in time, partly because now when people go to renew their license and end up in the plate denial phase, they are paying fines that they may have paid if it came about through the court system anyways. It's these people who kind of neglect to pay at all, and whether or not they are somehow relying on different licenses in order to bypass the system that sometimes still end up in default. And we also know that people do drive without licenses. So we haven't seen a significant shift in kind of the money that's coming into POA. Certainly, we'll provide you with some more detailed breakout with respect to some of those costs, and we can do that through a budget information paper.
Thanks.
And Councillor Kiefer.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just to follow up and clarify some things here on this Conestoga College UPass. I remember the discussion the last time we had on it, and since that time I've been contacted by Mike Dinning, he's the Vice President at Conestoga College, who has asked to have a further meeting with staff, and I think, Peter, I sent you an email with regards to, or to Mike Murray to set up that meeting with regards to further discussion. Now, I haven't heard anything back on that, but I think what needs to happen is that meeting needs to occur so that we can further discuss, because I don't buy this thing about isolation, you know, and not having the density. I mean, Conestoga College is right in the middle of the region. I mean, it's unbelievable. I think they should be on a par to the university students in terms of the UPass, but that's what the meeting was supposed to have discussed or be discussed at. So if that could happen sooner than later, I'd be pleased to see that happen.
Mr. Murray.
Yes, again, through Madam Chair. Yes, we'll set that meeting up. I have that email from you. I think one of the things that's important to keep in mind, when the students voted in this referendum, they knew exactly what the price of the UPass was going to be. So that's not new information. They were fully aware of that. So I just think that's important context to keep in mind. This didn't come after the fact. They knew what they were voting on.
All right. Okay, Craig. Oh, sorry, Barry. Councillor Urbanovic.
Just a quick thing, and it's a sensitivity for us Laurier grads. Wilfred.
Oh, I'm sorry, what did I say?
No, it says Wilfred on the...
Oh. Huge pet peeve.
Duly noted. We shall have that corrected.
Huge pet peeve.
Mr. Storts understands.
Well done.
Okay, so moving on then. Moving on to housing. So we have proposed budget issue paper, which is titled Enhancing the Housing Stability System, page 52 of the issue paper package. It as well is split into a couple of different bundles. And so, you know, in terms of, you know, choices for council, approving it, not approving it, approving one or the other bundle, it's not necessary that the entire issue paper be approved. Total cost at about 1.2 million annualized. Bundle 1 deals with serving additional individuals with portable home-based supports, adding additional winter shelter overflow beds, and a staff position on the administration side. Bundle 2, again, additional portable home-based supports and additional eviction prevention funding. So proposed to be implemented, you know, partway through 2019, annualized into 2020.
What, nothing? We've been waiting for wraparounds and here they are? That's great, okay. So we got nothing, you can keep going.
Thank you. And so for the remainder, we thought we would just provide a summary, just organized by department as opposed to an individual slide on each one. I don't intend to go through these in a huge amount of detail, but certainly would be pleased to answer any questions. And if there was additional information that would be helpful in terms of understanding the request, we would obviously be happy to bring that back to the February 6th meeting. Within corporate services, there are 4 issue papers, 3 relating to on the information technology side and 1 on the facility side. So the top one is basically a conversion from a temporary position to a permanent position relating to our corporate safety management system. and then 3 resource requests on the IT side. First of all, and highest priority on the IT side, maintaining security for what has become a highly complex IT system and infrastructure, and reduce the risk as we implement more and more applications and new systems going into effect. So that's a request for 2 positions. And then we have a very long list of projects that we are trying to get at to improve efficiency, to add automation across all of the program areas within the region. And a request has been made for 3 positions to further implement that long list of projects, which we expect to continue indefinitely. And then finally, a position on the GIS side, Geographic Information System side, to maintain and modify as we get more and more data in the GIS system. We're finding we need additional resources to help manage that system, which is used then in conjunction with a variety of other systems across the region. With respect to planning and development legislative services, so 4 issue papers here as well. The first one relating to ongoing funding for economic development initiatives. One of those requests, I believe, relates to the True North Conference, and I think we have a delegation coming tonight to speak to that, so there'll be more information there. And then funding for 3 programs, Residential Project Neutral Program, the Evolve Green Evolve Green Hub, and the Community Energy Investment Strategy. And those 3 are temporary. I think the Residential Project Neutral Program is a 2-year program. The others, I believe, are either 2- or 4-year programs. So it does require some funding in 19, but again, because of its temporary nature, then once complete, then that funding would come out of the budget. And then finally, on the transportation and environmental services side, a number of positions relating to traffic signals and traffic control, construction, the increased volume of construction and utility relocation permits within the corridor management area, looking for an additional resource to help manage those. Additional resource to help implement the transportation master plan. Additional resource with respect to the asset management work that the transportation is doing. And then I think at the request of council, 2 options with respect to traffic signal technology. One which would provide that technology across the entire region, a more or a pilot option that would see the technology implemented within the Central Transit Corridor. And then finally, some additional positions with respect, so additional requests with respect to asset management, the conversion of a waste collection inspector to a permanent position, and the previously discussed service expansion along for Route 21 in Woolwich. And so that, Madam Chair, is the full list of proposed service enhancements for 2019. Again, the full package was distributed back in December, and if any additional information is required, we can certainly bring that forward. And maybe I'll just pause there before we turn our attention to capital.
Much appreciated. Councillor Jaworski.
Thank you, through the chair. I recall last year we were having discussions on the advertising around the buses and the wrap to buses, and I thought that was going to come as a budget issue paper of if we wanted to take that off the bus, not take that off, not to put it on the buses, that it would come with a cost to us that would have to be absorbed somehow. So I would have thought there'd be a budget issue paper on that.
So I know there was some discussion with respect to the wraparound advertising on trains, and I think that was not pursued.
Yeah. But I think we asked for.
I don't recall the discussion, but we can certainly look into it and report back.
Yeah. Anybody else remember that? Okay.
I remember that.
Okay, a few people remember it. Good.
I also remember, Craig, that there was one advertisement on a bus in Cambridge that a lot of people didn't really like. I don't want to say any more than that. Is it real estate? No.
Yeah.
No, it's not.
Actually, Councillor Strickland probably remembers the bus wrap issue where we weren't going to have bus advertising wrapped anymore and bring that up as a budget issue paper. Do you recall that? Wasn't it us?
I know nothing.
No?
No.
Yeah, you do. Okay, good.
Okay.
Thanks.
We'll look into it and bring something back.
So should we take our break now? Mr. Sight for sore eyes. Wait. All right. Can we get another break? Yeah, okay.
Okay, so the remaining slides deal with capital and the information papers. And given that it's 5:15, I'm gonna skip over a couple of these and focus on the most important ones from a capital perspective. And I want to start at slide 56. So remember, we've moved off of water and wastewater now, and we're dealing with the remainder of the capital program. And based on the capital program as it currently stands, we have a debt outstanding profile that looks like this on slide 56. And so I think there's two main issues or takeaways from looking at this chart. One is overall debt outstanding is projected to increase fairly significantly over the next 5 years. And a big part of that increase is, I'll say, the green part of the bar, which is the growth-related debt. So similar to the conversation that we had with user rates, on the growth side, particularly with respect to transportation, we have a significant number of growth-related transportation projects over the first 5 years of the capital program. And completing those projects and funding them will require debt to be issued in order to fund those projects, when they're contemplated to occur. So again, as we go through the development charges background study and we look at the timing of projects, we look at the sustainability of the RDC reserves, the amount of debt that will have to be issued, we are going to be looking at some I'll say policies or principles governing the issuance of growth-related debt, and some guidelines for us to follow in terms of how much debt do we want to issue, what is a percentage of debt servicing costs as a percentage of development charge collections, things like that, to make sure that we're managing this debt as effectively as possible going forward. I think the user rate side certainly looks manageable. There are increases on the tax side still, and that's the piece we're going to get to in a minute. I'm going to skip over 57 because I want to focus on the next 3 slides. So this shows where we have areas that we have significant amounts of long-term borrowing in our capital program. This is not new information. We've been providing this information for the last 3 or 4 years, certainly through the capital asset renewal report that we brought forward last year. Facilities, waste, airport, Grand River Transit, all areas where there are significant amounts of, I'll say, state of good repair, asset renewal works being done that we don't have sufficient operating capacity to fund. And so we turn to debt in the absence of that capacity.
Councillor Foxton.
Thank you, through the chair. In the past, we have budgeted for development charges and not met the budget. I don't know where we're at this year. Are we on target with development charges? Will the funds be there or not?
I would say our development charge collections continue for the second straight year, continue to lag the estimates.
Can we see maybe a chart on that later on about how we're lagging and what kind of financial impact that has on us?
Yes, absolutely. And there's a couple of opportunities to do that. I would say probably in March, we will be bringing forward the annual development charge transaction report, where we'll be able to see exactly what was collected and how it was used. And we'll be able to provide some commentary at that point with respect to the reserves and the state of the reserves and our plan going forward, which obviously we'll be looking at again through this development charge background study process that we're in now and that we launched with the first development charge steering committee meeting today.
So can I ask, the screen that you showed in regards to development charges, you're saying in 2018 we did not meet the level that is there, or is that the level we did meet?
In 2018, our development charge collections were less than we had anticipated.
So in the chart here under 2018, we did not meet it on page 57.
57. Yeah, so this, So this chart actually shows what our projected debt servicing costs are. So not so much a budget to actual comparison, but I'm going to go back one more slide. On slide 56, if we issued the debt that we're contemplating through the capital program, so if this debt profile actually occurred on slide 56, the debt servicing cost, so the amount that we would have to pay out of property taxes, user rates, and development charges would be as shown here. And so you can see, I think maybe the point you're getting at is, again, the green part of this bar, the amount that we want to recover from development charges is the largest driver of debt servicing cost increases. And so that's why we're taking such a close look at the timing of projects, at the development charge policies that we have, at our expected collections, to make sure that we're maintaining sustainability going forward.
Thank you. Do you think March is too late to look at the development charges?
No, I don't. No, I don't. The bylaw, our current bylaw expires at the end of July. We'll be working through a number of policy discussions with the steering committee in February and March, and at that time we'll be able to give a final accounting, if you will, of exactly what the collections were in 2018. And we actually need that time in order to finalize all of our year-end numbers and contributions to capital.
Thank you.
And so in terms of a compelling slide, I would say this is it in terms of the funding for capital. When we look at the funding for capital that we have in the program right now and the targeted level of funding based on this capital plan, we're showing here overall, and we have communicated this before, you know, a shortfall in the $40 to $45 million range. So in terms of the capacity that we need over time in the operating budget to fund our state of good repair work and leave our debt capacity for major service expansion type projects, the gap is in the $40 to $45 million range and is potentially a little bit higher. And I say that because on the transportation side, we have moved in the $80 to $100 million cost range out of the 10-year capital program in order to keep our overall level of borrowing as I guess as sustainable as possible. So on a needs basis, the transportation number, probably the facilities numbers would actually be a little bit higher as well. So we're going to revisit that. So we're going to revisit that also in 2019 as we go through an update to our asset management plan. And at that point, we'll then be able to come back and say, give you an updated number and continue to roll out the strategy to get the operating budget capacity we need in order to fund this work. Going back to Mr. Murray's comments from December, our most significant and pressing financial issue is the funding of infrastructure. And I think this slide shows why.
Oh, Craig, I just want to check in. Are you okay? Thank you. Go ahead.
And then just a final stat here. One of the many factors that we follow, and certainly that is of interest to credit rating agencies, is our debt to reserve ratio. This is our ratio relative to our regional comparators. A target number would be about 1 to 1, and we're sitting at 2 to 1 right now. And so we know this. We know this from consecutive credit rating reports that our debt level is higher than our peers. And certainly than other AAA rated municipalities, and our reserve balances are lower than our peers. And so that's why that debt to reserve ratio is as high as it is, and we want to make sure that we're not, that we start moving that ratio in the right direction. So in terms of key messages, the intent is to build that operating budget capacity to finance state of good repair, focus our debt on major new infrastructure expansions, implement a capital asset renewal funding strategy, and ultimately in terms of the overall goal, maintaining our credit rating and finding that right balance between what do we have available in the bank to pay for projects and what do we have to borrow and pay from future user rates, property taxes, and development charges. So with that, a quick update. I know we're getting close to the end of our time here. There are 3 information papers provided in today's package: user fees and charges, some details on assessment growth, and some councillor requests. User fees and charges. So Councillor Clark, this is the slide I had in mind when I responded to your question early on. This is some of the proposed increases. The issue paper shows all of the proposed changes. There are a lot of them. I think the one in question is the GRT fare increase proposed at 3% on July 1st. The question was asked about the revenue generated and what would 2% look like. So the 3% increase on July 1st would generate an estimated $385,000, right? And then we would annualize that, so we would double that going into 2019. 2% would be about $255,000, and 1% about $130,000. And I would say, Madam Chair, that we are going to be taking a look at a number of these major non-tax revenues over the next couple of weeks, look at where we landed in 2018, and determine whether any adjustments to those budgets are warranted for 2019. And we'll also be looking at the effective date, in particular on the GRT side.
One moment, please. Councillor Clark.
Thank you. So I know this isn't the time to debate this, but I really don't like the 3% fare increase. It's significantly over inflation. But I guess my question is, and I appreciate getting the look at a 1% and a 2%. What I'm wondering is whether it's possible to say to what extent a higher or a lower fee rate would actually affect ridership. We know that last year, when we had a no increase, we had a big jump in ridership, and the previous year, when we had a 3% increase, we had a drop in ridership. I know that those aren't the only factors, but we did say in our reports that that was a factor. So I'm just wondering about the ridership sensitivity to fares, and whether there's any simple way that we can look not just at revenue, but impact on ridership.
So I don't think I can answer that question now. We could either look into it and bring some information back.
Yeah, I think so. I don't expect that answer now.
To respond at this point.
I don't have a fulsome answer, so
okay,
that's fine.
Probably safer for us to bring something back.
That's fine.
Okay, thank you.
Fair enough. Craig, and one moment, Councillor Strickland.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thanks for chairing my absence today. Just on the 3% increase for GRT, that is a figure that's contemplated within our 5-year business plan, correct? So this isn't a number that we've just kind of pulled out of the air. This is a number that we put into our business plan. And it is also related to increase in enhanced service improvements. Also, we have the issue papers in our proposed budget that include significant improvements into transit. So I think it's good to have some information come back on fare sensitivity. I'd also suggest if some information comes back that we also include in there how our fares compare on a relative basis to our competitors across Ontario, because we're typically at the low end of the scale. I still think we are at the low end of scale, but it would be good to see that information when the information comes back that Councillor Clark requested as well.
We can absolutely bring that back.
Okay. I think we're all clear. Yep.
Carry on. So with the fare increases that are planned in total within the base budget, across all the various program areas, generates almost $600,000 of additional revenue. You know, and keep in mind these are revenue increases that happen at various stages over the course of the year. Overall, has about a $600,000 impact, and that's reflected in the 2019 base budgets. Assessment growth, we reported last time at 1.92%. The issue paper provides a bunch of analysis, shows assessment by municipality, by property class, shows how each class grew or didn't grow over the course of 2018. So hope that information is helpful. And this is just a reminder that assessment growth is a net number. And while there are increases to the assessment base as new properties are added and improvements are made, there are also reductions as a result of appeals, requests for reconsiderations, and other changes. Some councillor requests from last time relating to some questions that were posed about fleet and green initiatives in our fleet. We had a request for major sources of revenue, some information about cycling infrastructure, and I believe it was Councillor Galloway that had a question about debt servicing costs as a percentage of revenue. Those are all provided in the councillor request information paper.
Okay, so Craig, Councillor Calloway.
Thank you, Madam Chair. What I'm wondering is how big a job would it be for staff to pull from all the various budgets what we spend on active transportation and create a separate line for active transportation as opposed to having it intertwined with road projects and various other projects that sometimes it doesn't get its full importance considered. Now, if it's answered on page 57, I apologize, but I don't think it is.
So we do, in the information paper on page 61, there is a table that shows, so it provides, I think, responses to the information that was requested in terms of basically our inventory of cycling infrastructure, 723 kilometers, and then some information about budgeted cycling infrastructure, all of which we're expecting to be funded from development charges. So base projects at 38.9 million, expansion projects at 5.2 million, other infill projects as well. Does that get you the information you're looking for, Councillor Galloway?
Well, only partially, and it's to some extent it's optics, but and active transportation is more than just cycling. So I mean, infill multiple use trails or infill sidewalks and other kind of infrastructure is, you know, all part of active transportation as well as cycling infrastructure. But I just think that, and I'm thinking that through our strategic planning exercise, which is going to start fairly soon, but post-budget, that's likely to come out as a fairly high priority. Given what people were saying about that, I mean, around this horseshoe during the election. So I'm just, I guess, trying to get ahead of that curve maybe a little bit by trying to understand what all we are already doing for active transportation. We may want to do more. That's probably a likelihood. But if we could understand better what, in fact, we are already doing. And I don't know how easy, I don't want to ask for something that's going to take hours and hours to pull out, but most road projects, major road projects will have, you know, something, you know, whether it's an MUT or it's a cycling lane separated or otherwise is going to be included in that. But it gets buried in the cost of the overall project. It may well be identified as a cost in the project, I'm sure it is. But I think if we're going to give this more priority than maybe we have in the past, it needs to have its own identity. And that's really what I'm trying to promote here. It may not come through the budget process per se because this is a hurry-up process this year, but I'd like staff to start turning their minds to that and whether or not that could be subject of a report or whatever. I'd be interested in seeing that.
Understood.
Good to go.
Okay, we're on the home stretch, Madam Chair. So police budget. So this table, working from left to right, the first column of numbers is the 2018 approved budget. And if I understand the outcome of the discussion today at the Police Services Board, Option 2 on the far right-hand side, or something very close to it, was what was endorsed and approved by the board today. I don't have the exact number, but I understand that 1%. Ultimately, that 1% tax rate impact is what was endorsed, which is about a 5.2% increase in the police levy. This will be the subject of a presentation at the Budget Committee's next meeting on February the 6th.
And so if I can just stop you there for one moment, please, Craig. Councillor Urbanovic.
Yeah, it was actually just going back to, I clicked in just as Councillor Galloway was finishing, and I'm glad that he's asked for that information on the cycling, because I think it is going to be important. I mean, to be frank, between this and the strategic planning session, I'm really going to be looking to see how we can move forward during the upcoming term of council between the region and hopefully between our individual municipalities, at least the 3 urban ones, look at the creation of a minimum segregated grid for our community. I think that that's doable within existing budgets and budget room and priorities. I think it's consistent with how many of us have prioritized cycling in terms of the recent election, and so I think all of this information will help inform that process and see how we can move in that direction.
Okay.
Okay.
Thank you.
Public input, I think we discussed last time we had the report that went to Administration and Finance Committee at their last meeting, and the public engagement site, for lack of a better term, is now active, and we'll be reporting back at both the February 6th and February 19th meetings. So this table now, in terms of the tax budget status, obviously has to be updated to reflect the Waterloo Regional Police budget. So if the police number, which shows here at 1.38, was 1, that would take us down to about 4.05%, inclusive of issue papers and inclusive of the police budget.
Is that a purposeful pause right there, Craig? Purposeful pause.
Just stating a fact. And so our schedule, so we've been through the first 2 meetings now. We'll meet again in 3 weeks on February 6th, and then get back together on February 19th for final approval. So just a preview, there's a fair bit of ground to cover. February 6th, of course, the wastewater budget approval. We have subject to approval of some finance reports tonight at council. There'll be some housekeeping amendments to the capital program that we'll bring forward. As I said earlier, we're looking at our major revenue budgets. We're also going to look at our utility budgets as well. Now that we have a better idea of where we finished off in 2018, we can now better gauge whether we have the right number in for 2019. Also going to talk about fuel prices, the RTMP funding strategy, an update on downtown core exemptions, public engagement, the police presentation, and a second public input meeting.
Okay, one moment, please. Chair Redmond.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just wanted to confirm that the police board did support a 1% increase in the police budget today, and they're working at that because Chief Larkin, I'm sure he'll be very eloquent, he'll be elegant too, when he appears to give the context for that. They're very firm that they do need the additional personnel, but they're going to find other efficiencies throughout their proposed budget, and he will come and present that. So it is 1%.
Excellent, thank you.
We're good.
And that, Madam Chair, concludes, I believe. Yep, it's not going any further.
Okay.
Yes, and I believe we're back here at 6 o'clock for public input session.
Yep. Looking for a motion to adjourn, please. Councillor Foxton. Chair Redmond, all those in favor? So carried. Thank you, everyone. Job well done.